Floraffiti is a community engagement project that began in 2012, founded and implemented by Carter Hubbard. In the fall of 2017, Floraffiti participated in the 29th annual Sculpture in the Garden exhibition at the North Carolina Botanical Garden in Chapel Hill. Floraffiti is a project that successfully builds community by giving people an opportunity to use their voice and express what is important to them in a positive, self-affirming atmosphere. The teens from the Refugee Community Partnership learned to write and perform spoken word poetry. They planted important words from their poem in the ground, deeply instilling the power of their words in this growing sculpture. Their performance around the words made a deep impact on the audience at the exhibition. As a result, Floraffiti was presented with the Community Award at this event.
What is community? What does that word mean to you? I know honesty and many harsh words and a buttload of sadness.
Don't throw your face in disgust and toss it in the trash. Having hope propels us to achieve our dreams and drive us forward towards our aims.
But before we move on, we draw a line. My heart is full of joy when we're together, since we're together.
A single drop of water does not create rain.
They're my community, where I want to be curing our sadness.
I may have many flaws, but please let me in. I belong to my house, a home built on diversity with a single hope.
This is our community.
Okay, well, that is a brief introduction to Floraffiti. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sonny Kelly. I'm an instructor of communication at Fayetteville Technical Community College, and so glad to be here with you, our NISOD family. I have with me Carter Hubbard, who is one of my colleagues, a fellow scholar, an artist, a catalyzer, as I like to call her. Carter is the founder, the originator, and the director of Floraffiti. Carter, hello. So glad to have you with us today.
Hey there, it's great to be here. And I can't do this without Sonny, so we're a team.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. When I learned about Floraffiti some four years ago now, time flies, going on 4 years, I did not know what to expect. I learned that there would be some planting and some poetry, and I was pulled in because I'm a communication public speaking guy, and I met you, and when I learned what Floraffiti is, then we did it, and I learned what it can do. It blew my mind, and that's why we're here today. So I want to just ask you in a nutshell, Carter, what is Floraffiti? What does it mean to you?
Floraffiti is yet another way to communicate. It brings people together in community. It expands community at the same time as it brings people in. It makes the community heart and soul bloom.
Yeah. I've seen that firsthand with regard to how we'll work with a group of people who are the primary participants, or in our case, in the context of teaching, the students, right? And then they connect to the community at large. So I do want to ask you about that group of people and this particular venture. Well, let me ask you, how many times have you done a Floraffiti exhibition or event?
Oh, wow. Been since 2013. And in some areas, we've gone back to the place that it was originally done because they still want it, the longevity of the piece, all the things that you can do with it to provide whatever the community needs, which changes all the time. It's been drawn back over and over and over every year.
Love it. So year after year, you've been bringing in large groups, small groups, all ages have been involved. When it comes to education, how does Floraffiti operate as a useful tool in the field of education for you?
I worked in high schools and university settings. It's not just one class. For example, at NC State, we worked with the women in science and engineering dorm, the eco village, art village, one of the art classes. One class was with the economics and agriculture, as well as an honors literature course too, and how it applies to all these areas.
Yeah. I want to ask you, I say education. I know I'm an instructor. You are many, many things. And I think you consider yourself an educator in your own right, though you may not be an instructor at an institution. How did you come to this work? How did Floraffiti come about? And what, how is it how did it become a part of you the way it is?
Oh, there's a couple different facets there. It was a design mistake. The idea of planting words and the impact and value of words. It also has to do with an area of the Southeast where I grew up and where words were stifled. And different ways that you could get a message out to people. If it wasn't in a traditional, within your voice, your actual voice, there are ways that you can extend your voice. And this project does that.
Yeah, I love that about this project. As an educator, my goal is to get my students to come to voice, especially as a teacher of interpersonal communication, intercultural communication, public speaking. And, we can do word clouds and we can do all kinds of great interactive activities in the classroom and outside the classroom. What I love about Floraffiti is it helps them to come to voice in a whole new medium, a whole new way of looking at what it means to be in the world in a material sense, right? You're planting real things and you're standing on the soil and you're speaking and performing and you are talking through metabolizing, processing the material, right? So on an educational standpoint, I just think it's so helpful to reiterate, to reaffirm, but also to even empower students in terms of letting them be scholars and saying, this, it so well, you can plant it, speak about it, connect other people to it, and you can teach, they can start to teach other people. And I think that's kind of a goal of educators, is that you want to get your students comfortable with the material so much so that they can teach it to other people. And Floraffiti, I love how you said having your voice stifled in a younger age challenged you and called you to bring voice through Floraffiti. And it allows not only people to be empowered, but also to grapple with the issues critically of the material that they're learning, right? So they can learn it in a deeper way. And speaking of a deeper way, I wanted to ask you specifically when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion. These are buzzwords everybody's talking about nowadays. We need to talk about them probably more than ever so that we can all get along better. How has Floraffiti played in your life and in your work as a tool toward improving equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion?
There's the video that we just showed. The students were in this sculpture show, and it was a traditional sculpture show outdoors. And this piece is not a traditional sculpture as it was known at that show. They had several hours to perform. They lived their performance in different ways. They tried different things. They slowly came out of their smaller shell and had a deeper sense of belonging as there were conversations that happened amongst the people who came to see the show. I think, and at that point too, it's a larger community, that particular town, and there are communities within community. And I think the people who came to see the sculpture show had a bit of a revelation that, oh my gosh, these kids are in our community, and I didn't really know it. And not only now I know it, now I have formed a relationship where I can have a conversation and I know more about what's going on in the greater community, not just my insular community, and what this, the greater community is made up of.
Yeah, I get this picture of all of our roots meshing and intermeshing and melding, right? We're connecting.
Yep.
And the beautiful thing about arts and horticulture in education is they allow us to drop our guard a little bit, because it's play. That's the nature of performance and art and poetry. It's play, and we're learning, we're getting our hands dirty. And in the midst of that, we realized we had so much more in common than we knew before we started doing this work together. So for me as an educator, I see an appreciation for diversity, equity, and inclusion within my classroom. And I love what you said, and with the greater community. Because when they see this beautiful art and this beautiful planting and see the word, they can learn from the students as the students learn from them, because it becomes a dialogue, right? So that everybody's a teacher learner in that process. Yeah, so I know that Floraffiti is a big concept, and it blew my mind at first as well. So we're going to go step by step to look at how Floraffiti works. There's a cool video we're going to show that gets into the steps of Floraffiti, and then I'll come back, Carter, and ask you some questions about how you can actually start a Floraffiti project. Okay.
Yeah.
When you combine this notion of planting words that mean something to you, rooting yourself in your truth, with this notion of also standing with that truth and speaking in an embodied way, like sharing your poetry, something you created, it just makes this wonderful synergistic experience.
The idea was to communicate words in a way that anybody could enjoy them, anybody could digest them in any way they wanted to. They're outside, they're available, they're a choice.
All right. That was a project we did back in Chapel Hill. And I always hear your voice saying they're a choice. And initially, when I hear choice, I think about agency in my classroom. I think about my students having the choice to interface with the material and the world in their own way, so they're comfortable with their own skin, which counters those things that we see like imposter syndrome or inferiority complex or the fixed mindset, all these things we talk about in pedagogy. And so choice to me is really important. I want you to choose this material, choose to learn it in the way that's best for you, and choose to express it in a way that's sustainable, right? So you can go out in the world and make it a better place with this stuff I'm teaching you. And I want to ask you, when you said choice, what did that mean to you?
Choice. It's powerful. It's between the stimulus and response. When the public sees this, they have a choice as to whether they want to listen or stop and see the words, question maybe what they are. The wonderful thing about this is that these words are a choice. People get to see them on their own time and wonder about them, question about them. They get to see the performance, and if there's an event that one of the performers is talking about something that about their community that they struggle with, it's an easier thing to hear. So there's a choice there of whether they want to listen or not. And a later project, which we'll show a video of that, with UNC, Silent Sam was coming down, and there were a lot of protests going on. And the thing about Floraffiti is, and bringing into this particular project at UNC, of finding ways that you can communicate, that you can include more people, where the space is welcoming. So there's the choice of how you want to express yourself and how you want to digest that material. Floraffiti allows that wonderful space to feel safe, to be able to express yourself, and also hear what's going on in the community in a way that doesn't feel like a protest. And at the same time, it feels like, hey, this is part of where I live and what I do. So the choice is there for anybody to participate in whatever capacity that they feel comfortable with.
Well said. That makes a lot of sense. I love the fact that I can see choice for my students. You can see choice for the larger community, in both and, right? It's organic. Our hands are in the soil. Our feet are on the soil. We're talking to our community. We're embracing. I mean, we've seen people hug people they never met before, and laugh and talk and cry with people they'd never met before because of this process. So How do we begin? I know this, it may seem to some educators or just people in the field of adult education, especially, as something that just seems like, far left field. How do you do something like Floraffiti? So for you, logistically, and then also just in terms of all the steps it took to teach and to process this with participants, how do you begin a Floraffiti project?
There's usually a community need. Sometimes I reach out, other people reach out to me. Working with nonprofits or educational institutions, and really it's about relationships. So Floraffiti itself is a project that develops relationship, but the relationship starts before then. When I have a relationship with the artists that I'm working with, such as you, and first and foremost is the community then coming into what are their needs. So having that conversation and finding out what their needs are, even, on an educational level, I have, career development I want to do. And this is really interesting. And it's also a way I can suit one of my needs and the needs of my students, and, figuring out different ways that we can talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of community members, economic development, other nonprofits in the area. For example, I've worked with the Art Therapy Institute several times in one particular town. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are involved. I work with the municipal aspects of a town where I'm interfacing with say there are Parks and Rec and who maintains the city streets and the areas that would be planted. There are a lot of players in the project.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, once you get the players together and you find out the need in that community, or in our case, in that classroom or on that campus, what's the next step? So you've got all the stakeholders, as you say, at the table to say, hey, we want to do Floraffiti, sounds good. Well, let me ask you this, in terms of funding, how much does something like this cost? And I know it probably varies, but how do you think about budget?
It depends. How many people are involved, how many words that they want to plant. So I have like sets of 20 words, 30 words, 40 words. Yeah, what are the logistics of getting people to and from these different places? And we've got a secure place for, for teaching, the writing workshops and things like that. So it varies. Yeah.
And so once you've got, all your ducks in a row, so to speak, you have the places reserved. For us who are on campuses, that's great because we've got classrooms we can reserve, and probably places out on the yard, out in the landscaping arena where they could be beautified with these words. So the place is procured. Now, of course, you've got to get seeds and start that process. What's that step look like in terms of getting the students together and teaching them horticulture in a relatively short amount of time?
And that's also something, the horticulture aspect is pretty hot right now. And I have a feeling it might stay that way for a while, simply because of COVID and everybody getting out in nature. And they realized what that did for their health and well-being, their mental health. Floraffiti is not fast, like building relationships are not fast. It just doesn't happen just like that. I work with the participants who are planting, and it's a slow process. There's nothing digital involved. I think that as they plant, or as, I've watched them plant too, that there's they have a different look about them when they're planting. There's something that goes back to the root of being a child, where you've played in the sand or the dirt when you were little, but they're actually sowing their words into the soil. And I think there is another layer of understanding or embedding the importance and the validity of themselves within the community. The planting process, like I said, is not fast, and they're realizing in some cases, if the word is not in English, that their word that is so to the core about themselves is going to be out there for everybody to see. And then, the growth process is slow too. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's slowly revealed. And yeah, it takes some time and relationship with the land and relationship with yourself and each other.
Yeah.
It just
With
embodies.
regard to that time that it takes to build that relationship, how long does it take to do the initial planting? Then how long are the workshops? I can kind of speak to that a little bit, but I know you designed it really, really well, really efficiently. Then what's the time frame from planting to seeing the bloom, typically?
Yeah, so the workshops usually come before that, because from the pieces that are created in the workshop, writing workshop, one word is taken from each piece, and that's chosen by the participant, one that they find important to their piece, and that's the word that they choose to plant. It usually takes, well, with each person planting their own word, we spend an afternoon along, about anywhere from 3 to 5 hours planting. And of course, it depends on Mother Nature and the weather and the meteorological conditions as to whether it's, really warm, wet, dry, cold. Sometimes things start to appear as soon as 2 weeks, and sometimes it takes a little longer. It typically lasts, I've had it last for 5 months, and that was in a year of a drought.
Wow.
But typically anywhere from 2 to 4 months is the duration of the words that are there. And each year we do the project differently. It's flexible, which is great, because then that meets the needs of a community, which, the needs of community, they're not going to be the same in every community.
You got it. I keep thinking about this notion of planting seeds. First you have to plant the seeds into the minds of the community to find out what the needs are and to say, hey, let's do this project. Then you have to plant the seeds in the minds of the participants. Like I call them poetic seeds, right? What do you want to say? Back to the classroom, what material are you dealing with and how are you grappling with it and applying it to yourself? And what's one key word that you could distill? I talk about word maps. Word maps can be very helpful in trying to find out what students' concerns are, but also what they're learning, what are they retaining? So a word map you might see on a screen is one thing, but to be able to plant it and spend that time with your colleagues and then wait a couple weeks and come back and see it. And what I love is it's sustainable. A typical semester at my institution is 16 weeks. So it's 4 months. So, you plant, let's say you plant something early in the semester, it's going to be up. And it's going to outlive the semester. So you can still point to your friends and show your friends and the community the work and the process you've gone through intellectually, I'll say artistically, horticulturally, hopefully emotionally, and even spiritually in some ways, right? And in terms of our connection to ourselves and what we're doing here. So I love how this process, as you said, it takes time and it stays longer than just one quick lecture or one quick project.
Yeah. And it's sort of like an incubation period that anyone that's teaching can get ideas about how they then go into a different classroom and apply this. It can be used in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I think about what we've been doing lately, especially on my campus, and it's probably happening across the nation, is trying to build up the morale of the teachers. The pandemic took its toll on all of us, physically, emotionally, et cetera, and to get back into the swing of things and to be face-to-face again and trying to learn and teach in an environment that's it's fraught with uncertainty. We've been doing more workshops and retreats and trying to get to know each other. And I found that to be very helpful and very healing because, if we're being honest, we've all gone through trauma. The pandemic was replete with trauma. We all came through that, whether there were deaths in our families or illnesses, et cetera. So coming back together and trying to find creative ways to reconnect to each other and to purpose so that we can go into our classrooms and be the best to our students is an important thing to do. And I think a Floraffiti project, just even as a team building effort to say, hey, we're going to plant words that talk about or speak to what teaching means to us, the purpose of this institution and how I play into it, just to remind myself. So when I go out into this scary world, right, I can see planted there is why I'm here and why my colleague is there. And I want to adopt that and use that as well. So I'm excited about the fact that even beyond the classroom, just in terms of building up the morale and connection between my colleagues, this is a great tool to do that kind of thing.
And there was one time when we were planting and a woman walked by and wanted to thank all of us planting, because the year before she had had a really hard time in her life, and she would walk home from work and she said, this kind of saved me every day, seeing these words. These were things that appeared out of nowhere, and they gave me hope.
Yeah. And we've talked a little bit about the diversity, equity, and inclusion angle in terms of how this helps us to process those things. Speaking of trauma, right? This nation has gone through a whole lot. How have you seen this in regards to helping people to reach those higher aspirations, being better together and being connected and being more inclusive as communities? How has Floraffiti helped us to process, especially in the midst of the trauma and uncertainty of the last 5 years or so?
Good question. Yeah, it's just, again, one of those things where there's this almost innate commonality that we've played in the dirt and we've played in the sand before, at least where the planting goes. It's an opportunity to talk about your community. It's an opportunity for local storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's another project that we're doing, is a storytelling project with the North Carolina State Poet Laureate, and in the classroom with an honors African American Studies class, where they're interviewing their elders to tell stories that are possibly unremembered, as the title of the project goes, for what the needs are for this project. And the words from these interviews will be planted, and there will be a QR code, which is something that we were going to use at UNC, and for various reasons, we've waited until now, one main one being COVID, to use the QR code so that people can download these stories on their phone. And that'll give them the opportunity to, again, more deeply know each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love how you bring storytelling in. As a public speaker, as a person who teaches interpersonal communication, I remind people we are our stories. And what we do with each other's stories really will dictate how our relationships go, because relationships move at the speed of trust. And if I can trust you enough to tell you my story, and if you will hear my story, and the connection inside the classroom, outside the classroom, in the community, it's boundless how far we can go together. And so thank you for sharing that. It's so important. I just think that in this day and age where people are using talking points and arguing back and forth and not really getting anywhere, it would be really nice if we could stop, play in the dirt, and tell each other stories. And this is not like, rose-colored glasses, we don't have problems, but it is to say there's the solutions lie in synergy and in connection. And what better way than to be outside in nature, connecting to nature, each other, and what we're learning at the same time. Well, with that said, I'm going to pause because there's another video that I'm going to bring up that gives us a gist of what it's like to see the project in full swing. So let me pull this up. It's from the 2018 project again.
I liked feeling more in touch with different types of people in our community. It does kind of point out how narrow our lives can be if we don't open ourselves to opportunities like this.
The participants have a deeper sense of the power of their words, that they're actually putting them in the ground, they're planting them in the ground, they're going to grow, they're going to be there more than just a fleeting moment of speaking the words.
I am a nurturer.
I am a heart.
I am a bomb. I'm pretty optimistic.
Facilitator of community. I am punctual.
I am funny.
I am friendly.
I am strong.
I love these videos because they just bring to life this concept of Floraffiti. I should have said this from the beginning. I want to ask you, how did you come up with the spelling? Because people always misspell it. So let's clarify it.
That's right. Yeah. So that would be a very important part of the history. Floraffiti is a mashup of two words. Flora, the obvious growth of plants, two words sort of put together. Floraffiti. And if you go to look on this, look about, find out more about Floraffiti online, you'll have to spell that with 2 F's and 1 T. I have finally learned how to spell graffiti myself correctly, but it'd be hard to find otherwise. It's not an easy autocorrect on in your browser.
Yeah, and I always have to remember that 2 F's. So actually, if you count the first F, there'd be 3 F's in the word.
Oh, this is true.
Right? And so people can learn more about how to begin and how to connect with you and start this process by going to floraffiti.com, right?
Yeah.
Now, I really was stricken by that long list of community stakeholders at the end of this last video. Lots of folks involved, lots of folks sharing their resources, their time, talent, and treasure. So what does this work mean for a community?
The first thing that springs to mind is the health and well-being of a community. It really shows that there are these sort of silent partners in the background, because that's why they're thanked, at the end, but they realize the value that this project extends to the greater community and, to the participants, obviously, and then the greater community. It's a way of validating the participants and what they contribute to the community, as well as, kind of like a silent validation that, we value this, we want it, it's important.
Yeah. I love that. And so when it comes to valuing, I know we talked about UNC Chapel Hill and that challenging time when there was a debate about taking down the Confederate statue, Silent Sam. And so we were brought in by the UNC Center for the Study of the American South and did a project from 2019 through 2020. And so I wanted to just ask you just to kind of set that up and let us know, how do we get invited to that? What did that project mean to you? Then I'll play a little video about it.
There was a call, and it was really subject just to the insular part of students at the university. And this was being named as the community that was being affected by Silent Sam. I wrote in and suggested that there's more than that small community, that the community being affected by the statues coming down was much greater than that. The people that work on campus, whether they're in housing or landscaping, and then beyond campus itself, the effects are, being felt by the community members that lived in the town, or the community members who come to that college from other parts of the country. It's a highly trafficked university, for various reasons, between the education and the sports, or the people that are working in other counties that are coming to this university to work. There's a lot more people being affected by it. And I think to how to define community, that it was not just one small little piece.
It's good stuff. I know, just having participated in that experience, for me, it was so much about being able to breathe for a minute, and just consider what we've been through as a community, what we were going through, and what this time meant to us. And I think poetry was just so necessary in that season. It was just necessary. And I know a lot of people who aren't poetic, who are artistic, who don't consider themselves to be poetic or artistic, or don't consider themselves to be into like public speaking and things, may think, oh, that didn't really matter. But it really was empowering and encouraging to see people from all different backgrounds. And you've done this with folks who are in the STEM field, folks who are in the humanities, folks who are but who are staff and not necessarily, artists or performers or teachers. And I find that it just helps us to just exhale for a minute. Right now, I'm not making a political statement. I'm not protesting. I'm just planting, and I'm just being. I'm trying to connect,
There was one person who was going to perform their word, but via interpretive dance, if I remember correctly, too.
It was. So we had storytellers in the community, we had poets, we had dancers, we had people who were just there a little bit nervous, and they were just going to share what they planted. and everybody was allowed to speak and to breathe and to be together with no rebuttal, no arguments, just a chance to connect. And I thought that was really, really helpful. And just, it was refreshing, especially in this age where there's just so much strife. And rightfully so. There's a lot going on. We should all be standing for what we believe in and advocating. And we should find some ways to process it, metabolize it, work with it together. And I think Floraffiti brings that to the table.
I think the project also really focuses on the need for belonging.
Come on.
And how can we belong in space when we don't all think the same way?
Yeah. And how can we know what we think if we don't hear each other's stories? We don't ask, And honestly, I found this in my classroom. I understand why people don't ask, because you're afraid of offending, because you don't want to seem ignorant. But I always say, ignorance is a great thing. It's a sign of opportunity to learn. Now, willful ignorance is a problem. But if you just don't know, you ask. But we've come to this place now where everybody wants to be the smartest person in the room and know everything and have no questions. And that makes for really dangerous operations if you don't have the conversations to get to know each other,
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is a video I'm about to show of the work that we were able to do in Chapel Hill. COVID slowed it down and adjusted. We had to modulate it. But that's, again, a testament to the flexibility of Floraffiti. But here's a little bit of what we got to get done in Chapel Hill with that project.
It started about 8 years ago, sort of as a covert thing around Chapel Hill, planting words of inspiration. And over the years, we've added to the project.
And we just sat down and said, well, what do you want to say? If we're going to imagine ourselves here and into the future, like who Chapel Hill is, what would you say? And so I do a lot of embodied workshops and activities to kind of help people to get out of their own sense of expectation, or even their sense of what it is to be reserved or to be whatever they think they are. Let's just consider who you are in your knower.
And then from the workshops, the pieces that each participant creates, they pull a word either from that piece or that they find relates to that piece. And with that word is the Floraffiti part, where they plant the word in the ground and then it grows, and when it comes up, they perform around it.
This is reverence, a dream planted for future collaboration. Band-aids can't fix this. Plaques for black facts are tombstones of action and change. Things remain the same.
Planting and having that discussion really deeply embeds their power and their voice in the world.
When we plant something, we are creating a place of growth and a place of courage. So I feel like the activism of this is the publicity of it, the fact that we do it out in public places and we challenge people to stop, to interrupt their day, to take a break and just pay attention to something maybe you never heard before. Pay attention to someone who has a voice that maybe you never listened to before, but here's the time to listen. Yeah, here's the time to listen. I'll tell you, Floraffiti brings out the best of me. It's a very music process. I feel like it's a muse, I think, for all of us. And I think it brings out the best in all of us, right? And Carter, you of all people who've done it more than any other person on the planet, you bring this fresh energy every time. I always think, well, Carter's got to be tired of this. And you're not. You never get tired of it.
It's never the same project. It's never replicated the same, as we're all, individuals and we come together as a collective. Those experiences are never the same. You can't, replicate that kind of thing twice. So that keeps it exciting. It's also working with the community and, whether it's educators or nonprofits, working with them with what their needs are and how to best meet their needs. It's a collaborative effort. So that keeps it interesting and exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will ask you this question, on that project that we worked on with Imagine UNC's Future with Art, we dealt with people of all different generations. You and I are similar in age, and we dealt with people who are a lot younger and people who were, some were angry and some were confused. There was a lot going on. How did Floraffiti help you to kind of process the differences in age and race and gender? I mean, you present as a white female, I present as a Black male, and there's all the baggage that comes along with that when we come together to do the work. So how has Floraffiti helped you to, I don't know, process the diversity around you?
Oh, it definitely, it deepens the values that are important for each person. And to sort of to put myself aside and put myself in somebody else's shoes, for sure.
Yeah.
It also reminds, I have my own, I think, or, you know, and values that I would like, or how I'd like to be valued in society, you know, as a woman. And quite often you push those things away or push them down because you need to get on with your day. It was just, you know, it's a reiteration of we're all struggling in some way, as we're all having successes too. But to come together and have that allowing space for each person to express themselves, you know, it's humbling. There are lots of words for it.
Yeah. I really love how you said allowing space, because I guess that's what kind of space I want to create in my classrooms, but it's also what I've experienced with Floraffiti. I feel like I'm allowed to just be me. I don't have to say something that represents all of Black America or all of the teachers or whatever other demographic element about me. I'm just there and I'm learning and I'm talking and I'm being myself. And I think, as you said, I learned that mostly by watching these participants courageously stand up and just speak the truth in this moment, what community means to them, what coming through the struggle and imagining a new sense of identity or a new sense of community means to them. And it does allow me to not compartmentalize, but go ahead and take off all of the burdens of representation that I oftentimes feel when I'm in public places, and say, no, I'm a Floraffiti participant. I'm doing this project, right? And I find even more of what's really on my heart because I'm not distracted by the noise, you know, out there. So allowing space, yes, I love it. We always come up with new language when we talk. This is great. Well, I wanted to ask you now on a well, I'll say a lighter note, but there may be some heavy stories here. What are some of your favorite stories from Floraffiti? And I have a little slide deck here that I'm gonna pull up.
Yeah. Put that up and
let me pull that up. So, your favorite stories from Floraffiti. This first one, beep beep. Tell us about this.
People, beep beep. I've got your attention now.
Right.
You know, this was more for, you know, a municipality, and they're approaching a circle there. But what are we hearing? What are we seeing? What are we feeling? What's it like, you know, in the everyday world? But this one was just, you know, an idea of what does Floraffiti look like from above. So often we're seeing it right on the, you know, street edge, which we have a good perspective in that way if we're standing there. But yeah, just to get your attention.
Love it. I love it.
So let's see. That's collaborating for the youth in our community. This will just give you an idea of the rich vibrancy of the words and how they can really communicate something directly like that. And yeah, that's let's see. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. This was a young man that was doing community service hours, actually. And as we're doing this, we're having incredible conversations. I found out a lot about his life and the struggles he was having and the choices that he was making to navigate those struggles. And we would have, you know, even deeper conversations about that. But he loved planting. And he said, if I could do this for all of my community service hours, you know, please sign me up.
I love it.
I would much rather be doing this than any of the other things that have been proposed to me to do.
And what's cool is he's making something sustainable, right? Like this could last for 2 to 5 months. So it's not just cleaning something up. You're actually putting something in the community, producing something.
Yeah. And it's something that can be shared. You know, there's a matter of satisfaction and pride in what you're doing. Yeah. And realizing that a lot of people are going to see this, and that's something that I did, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I love visibility. So important. All right, I'll go to the next one here.
Purpose. I don't come up with these words. These words, whether it's in a writing workshop or we do just sit down and talk about what's important to you. What is your relationship? Why are you here on this earth and what are you doing? And this is one at NC State that came out of one of those workshops where, people really have, this deep need and desire to be purposeful. And there's always, some more stories, whether this has to do with the environment or what they're studying and how they're going to impact the world. What does that look like? So there were, lots of discussions about what part purpose plays in our lives.
Yeah. This is small. It looks small. Is it as small as it looks?
It's probably a little smaller than the one you just saw. This is an Urdu word for hope. And this was a project with students that were in 2 different classrooms. And one classroom there were English learners, and I'm going to read something that the teacher said about this. And she said, I saw English learners who are usually really shy around mainstream peers open up and comfortably chat with their partners. Through the experience of planting, they formed new bonds and expanded their social circles, which is so important for immigrant students in order to feel welcome in the school and the community. And her name was Amna, and she was going to plant the word in English, but the other class that participated were filled with art students, and they were learning about public art, and they were like, no, you can't do that. This is your language. You need to show people that this is you. And, there was this smile that came across her face that I don't think probably, happens very often. And, in like the teacher said, it was, with her peers and having that sense of belonging, being able to include something that was, deeply rooted in her life.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, when you have that a little placard or a sign that has a QR code, if someone can't read it, they can always check on the QR code and learn more. So it challenges people to be active in their witnessing. Yeah. Oh, look at these beautiful people. Tell me about these folks.
I just happened to be at this space, and this is a farmer's market area, and just to, attest to the community engagement where they were actually working out underneath the covered space, and they were referring to the words in their workout. So I'm like, hey, how about a picture? Let's see what's blooming in this place. They were really excited about it.
I love it. I love it. Not just impacting the landscape, but impacting everyone who walks across or lives or works out across it. That's great.
Yeah.
This is a big picture.
And this is something, after I tell you about why this slide is up, and this is something I know that Sonny will be able to speak to, is that words matter.
Yeah.
This is the state capitol in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we were planting words there that had to do with their economic development arm of the city, and they were very simple words like play, bike, active words, and one of them was move. And I'm a creative thinker and doer and like coming up with other words, right? I was really surprised because, 2 things. Rarely would they ever let anything happen in this space. It's the Capitol that's not used anymore, and their statues on the premises too. They wouldn't let us plant the word move. And it took me a little bit to go, what's wrong with move?
Right.
They were afraid people were going to make that association to move a statue.
Oh.
So, words matter. So I know Sonny has probably some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as we see here, context matters as well, right? You have to be so aware of where your body is, where the words are, because they land differently into people's minds and bodies differently. Yes. So I love the fact that this is drawn out, in this historical site. You see this new growth here. And I've learned through this process that words are the building blocks of our stories. Our stories are our connective tissue between our struggles and our victories, as you said earlier. And so I think it's just so important that people find a way to use their words. It was Fred Rogers, the famous Mr. Rogers, who said that if you're feeling something, it's human. Whatever is human is mentionable. If it's mentionable, it's manageable. And you know, any good therapist will tell you, you've got to start speaking it first. If you want to handle the problem or deal with the problem, you've got to name it first. So that's what I love about Floraffiti. One of the many things I love about Floraffiti is it empowers us to name what we're experiencing, our joys, our sorrows, our challenges, even sometimes our confusion and uncertainty. And in a public place like this that kind of melds and meshes the history with the contemporary so that we, especially as students, students of life or students in schools, can be reminded of the fact that we are a part of the larger fabric that was here before we got here. And hopefully we'll be here stronger and better after we leave. And so, yeah, this is a great shot.
Another word too, at the beginning of, we used to plant a lot, is breathe. And that's always been like a word of calm and, you know, really good connotations. But, you know, I was polling people on Instagram and Facebook, what would you plant now if we could plant? Yeah. And when somebody put breathe, and that made me stop short, and I'm sure other people too, that word completely changed. At the beginning COVID, you know, breathe represented something else where I couldn't breathe.
Wow.
You know, even the social and political unrest too of not being able to breathe. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
yeah. Multiple levels, and it's existential. It is lamentation. It is a cry for justice, for freedom. It's also just a simple human activity that we do every day and we all do together. We have it in common, the need to breathe, you know?
Yeah, without thinking, you know, an autonomic.
Yeah, autonomic process, right? Come on, biology. Come on, interdisciplinary. I love it. Tell us about this. Speaking of interdisciplinary, you got language.
Yeah, this I loved. This was at NC State, and I was working with the WISE dorm, which is Women in Science and Engineering.
Yeah.
And they had some words that they had collected, but they weren't sure why they were collecting these words. So we went through the process of having that conversation about what's important to you and why the white storm? Why are you here? Why are you in the storm? How is a woman and an engineer, what does that mean in the world? Yeah. And we got to a point of choosing words to plant, and somebody said, hey, let's plant a word in Spanish. And I'm like, great, who here speaks Spanish? And everybody kind of had blank stares. Nobody was speaking Spanish. And I said, well, why would we not plant a Spanish word? So here we had an opportunity to talk about representation.
Yeah.
And so we discussed that. And I said, does anybody else here speak a language? And there was one young woman that spoke something like 11 Arabic languages. I think there are probably about 15 dialects at least. Mm-hmm. And the reason why also we were talking about planting a word in another language is they wanted to plant the word defiant. And there's a vetting process that everywhere where we plant, we have to go through so that it doesn't misrepresent the town or the university or the school. Yeah. And the person who I was working with, who was also with me, said, I don't know about that. Now I'm wondering now, you know, post COVID, not just COVID, but everything that has gone on socially, whether they would now say, yeah, let's plant that and let's talk about it. But the word was defiant, and they weren't going to let that through the vetting system because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to, you know, plant it and it would not look good on the project. So that's when we started talking about the, you know, who speaks another language and why would we not plant the Spanish word over, you know, another word in another language. So yes, that this means defiant in a particular Arabic language. I do not recall which one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they got it in there, you know. And then you have words like this that remind people English is not the only word spoken here.
Yeah, way to think and speak outside of the box. Yes.
Yeah, and it would be great at this point to be able to have the QR code for that project, you know, to be
Right.
able to talk about representation, you know, what does that look like?
Yeah. What does representation look like? Yeah,
Yeah.
embodied and in the soil here.
Yep.
Oh, look at you guys.
I
That's
just
you on
thought
the
I'd
right
put
there. I
that
see.
in, just because of the students, by the end of that project, which we saw this in the video, where they won this spontaneously created award because it made such an impact. And they were speaking in front of students, speaking in front of patrons, not just patrons, but the opening reception for this, about 60 people. Afterwards, they were beaming and they were talking about all the other things they learned in this project, where they got to work with a camera, different aspects that went on behind the scenes that they felt so valued. They were, equal with these adults here, and they could talk about what their experience was like and how they wanted to take that experience and bring it with them forward in the future, and their interests were, I think I'd really like to do video, and this is why. It wasn't just like, oh, this is cool, but let me tell you more.
Yeah. Oh, it's
So
good.
their faces, that says a lot for sure.
It's everything, right?
Yeah.
Love it.
And here's another word. It means grow. In this particular community, there's a large Burmese community, and this is the language that they speak is Karen, and this word in Karen means grow.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And one of my favorite ones, one of the things that I constantly remind myself is to explore, and so many facets of life, and hopefully through this presentation, you have a sense of what can be explored through the project, if not in your own personal life, and how you think about things, what you're saying and what you're teaching, and the different ways that you can, different methodologies that you can use to teach, and hopefully maybe even bring in, other classrooms to figure out ways to expand concepts. So it just shows that greater collaborative process and how we are also connected.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing those shots and taking me back. Some of those projects I was involved with, some I was not, but I vicariously enjoyed it, enjoyed the experience again. I wanted to just say my final thought in all of this, and that is that Floraffiti for me is a force multiplier. You're talking about people learning, in this case, it was photography, public speaking, articulating their own cultures and languages. It is fertile soil for interdisciplinary, intercultural, interracial, interethnic, all those other things, communication and connection. And we are indeed better together. When we start to mix in those disciplines, et cetera, we just become more relevant. We as educators, we as teachers, we as learners, we as community members. So I just wanted to say that anybody who's thinking about Floraffiti, please go to floraffiti.com, 2 Fs. Three Fs if you count the first F.
Right, yeah, the first one, and then 2, and towards the end.
Learn how to do this, because I think it's fertile soil, as I said, for force multiplication and learning and teaching in a new way we've maybe never done before, but is so promising and sustainable as well. What are your final thoughts on all this? There's a whole lot. I do want to say there was, we talked about NCSU WISE, and also the art therapy, North Carolina State Art Therapy Institute. I want to give you the opportunity as you close to just think of any stories or final thoughts on those projects.
Yeah, that interesting thing about the Art Therapy Institute, it's not just for the members that utilize the organization. The project is a storytelling project, the one that will happen next. And it brings in the community members too. And through expressive arts therapy, it's horticultural therapy. Just that need to plant, a pot in your window with some bright flowers. Getting in there, creating relationships and telling stories. And that's how you create a relationship, is telling your stories and sharing the things that are unique to you. But then at the same time, there's universal context that we can all relate to each other.
Yeah, amen to that. I've got one final video that I'm going to play here as we close out, just to give folks a final taste of Floraffiti. Anything that we missed or anything that you want to share with the group here before we go?
No, I can't think of anything. Other than I can't wait to see what happens next, because it is always different and, based on those needs. So yeah, I look forward to the future of it for sure.
This has been a planting session. We're planting seeds of future Floraffiti projects. We hope you all will join us.
Placemaking, connection, guided artistic expression. These are the main features that Floraffiti offers to communities. Collaborating with municipalities, neighborhoods, schools, organizations, and people who are rooted in their local community. Created by visual linguist Carter Hubbard, Floraffiti is a project where participants grow plants in the shape of words, giving new purpose and meaning to a space.
Placemaking transforms spaces to places, destinations filled with opportunities for creative community engagement by reflecting stories of the local social climate through self-expression, by building relationships through dialogue, and simply the wonder and surprise of seeing the words as bright green living things. All of this affects a community's health and well-being on a variety of levels.
Gotta go slow.
Floraffiti is multifaceted and can be tailored to your community's needs, working with local professional artists. It can even provide additional levels of engagement through writing workshops where participants create original poetry and learn how to effectively perform their poem in front of an audience.
The poetry that they're producing off those words, I think is pretty direct to, today's
I think they're proud of what they're doing too.
Yeah.
Not only have they written beautiful poetry, but they've also planted the words. I think it's cool.
I remember seeing maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, just random words when I was walking down Franklin Street, in the ground around the hotel. And I remember thinking, now that's really cool.
So I got to meet some really neat people that in my daily walk I probably wouldn't have met. That was an enriching experience for me. It also does kind of point out how narrow our lives can be if we don't open ourselves to opportunities like this.
When you combine this notion of planting words that mean something to you, rooting yourself in your truth, with this notion of also standing with that truth and speaking in an embodied way, like sharing your poetry, something you created, it just makes this wonderful synergistic experience.
Floraffiti takes place where you are, in your city or town, in your neighborhood, at school, and in local organizations and businesses.
Wherever you are, Floraffiti provides a creative and visual voice that empowers you to transform your community into a place of deeper meaning and deeper connection. Loving where you live, empowering voices, and building bridges through community, Floraffiti brings words to life and life to words. Contact Carter Hubbard for all the possibility that Floraffiti provides.